Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As you can see from different places, but with the same face, we will talk today with Kevin in the next Wasteless World Talks. Bill, unfortunately, is on the way, so no connection, but we will do it. And I'm sure the topic will be interesting today because the term today is space. And it's my question to you, Kevin, the standard one as every week. If you close your eyes and you hear the term space, what came first to your mind?
Well, the black stuff, the stars, I think of space as this endlessness that our planet lives in, and that I can't really describe. I have no idea how it works, but that's what I think of space.
You know, it a little bit surprised me. Not because you are wrong, but because you are author, and if you write, you use space frequently.
Yeah, that's true. It's yeah, there is a space bar on the computer here. So yeah, in fact, it is the most worn of all the keys on the computer.
So why didn't came this space to your mind, but came the space which you cannot touch? This one you touch every few minutes, I will say.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's because it's so small, two-dimensional, whereas I always consider space having at least three dimensions to it. And the other interesting thing is you think of space normally as empty rather than full.
On the other hand, the reason why I'm not in my office because I was in a factory having workshops on innovations and sustainability and so on. And we talk a lot about space. And we talk about we talk about the full space instead of the empty space. Unfortunately, 56% of all containers or shipping containers all around the globe are empty. They are shipped empty, 56%. So
yeah, I remember during COVID, there was this crisis that all the containers were in the wrong place because they weren't being returned to where they came from.
Exactly. And it is generally, it's a long time. So I've worked for logistics for 35 years or so. And it's frequently that the space is really, I will say it's not being used the right way. And I speak here about the space in a room, in a container, in a truck, whatever, this type of space. And it is interesting that we use the same term for space on the space bar on the computer keyboard. We use the same for the sky. We use the same for the volume, or how to say, and still it's the same word.
I was talking once to an architect about interior design, and I was writing for a lighting company. And then we came to the conclusion that the biggest architectural element in the room is light, which is really interesting because it is nothing, but it's so important. It is the biggest single thing in a room.
That's really interesting. I never thought that light will be a component of a building or room or anything, but you are right. I think it's connecting, the light is connected to a well-being or a good feeling in the space.
Yeah, and just getting around it. It's you know, you notice beautiful lighting immediately. You also don't notice harsh lighting when you're working on it, but it affects you quite severely.
It is interesting. I never thought about it when I started with the term. And there is one more different thing. I did not have today in the noontime discussion because I was in the workshop. So this is really the first time I'm speaking about the term. And already now I'm surprised because I know all of them, but in some way did not consider about it. Do you think that the term space was hijacked as well? It seems to me that not, but I'm not sure.
No, it seems to be doing just fine. No one has stolen it yet. Not even the state agents managed to steal that one. It's and it's interesting because there is empty space, there is full space, there is lack of space, there is too much space. It still works as a good term.
Yesterday, SpaceX, generally, who has the space in the name, the Elon Musk space company, announced that they launched the 400th rocket. 400 of them has been launched. And what is interesting, in the entire article and in the entire history of the SpaceX, nobody spoke about waste or CO or the consumption of water and, wasting of a lot of things which nobody speaks about. Do you think that the space above our heads, I mean the sky and all what is above, will be filled one day with our trash or with something else?
I think it already is. There's this talk of there's so much space junk orbiting the planet right now that it's getting quite difficult to coordinate if they're talking about going to the moon again or to Mars. It's actually quite difficult to get from near space without hitting some of the stuff. And this stuff is going extremely fast. So even a small piece of junk will smash delicate equipment.
I was yesterday on a discussion, or partly on a discussion of the space industry, European space industry generally talking, meeting in Brussels or somewhere in Switzerland, I'm not sure where they met. There was a lot of discussion, and when I asked why it's turned the orbit into the landfill, silence come.
Yeah, it's the same with everything. The cheapest option is the one they take, and the cheapest is just to leave this rubbish floating around rather than bring it back home.
There were even a project, I'm not sure where it came from, but there was a project that we will send our trash into the space, really trash. I don't know who proposed it, but it was so crazy idea, and still there was a discussion about it. It's I just wonder. I know the old typewriter machine, which has the space bar generally in the same place as our keyboard on the computer. And I just try to remember when my granddad write on this typewriter. It must be one of the most frequent used keys because between every single word there is a space.
Yeah.
This way.
I think most common letter in English is the letter E. But I think that space is used even more than E in a typical manuscript.
I promised yesterday that I will check the term and its frequency, but I did not, to be honest. So I will try to do till the next week the space, which I think will be even very difficult to track in using some Google or whatever resource. Because if I write how many spaces is in the, it will not understand what I mean, I think. I don't know how to ask the question, to be honest.
So I think one interesting thing is that I was talking with my first publisher, and normally when you lay out a page, you have, there's different spaces. So between a paragraph, there's just the normal paragraph break. Between a section, there's a one-line break. In between the bigger section, there is a two-line break. And when they laid out the book, I did it, and then they redid it, and they redid it wrong. Yeah, so I said to them, why have you done this? And they said, well, we want to save paper. I know it's quite interesting. What's more important, saving paper or making it easy to read? And I still think it should be made easier to read, otherwise the whole thing becomes a waste of paper.
I had on the workshop today, I have a piece of paper and I let the people ask what it is. And generally it was a piece of paper produced by a machine which erase paper and make new paper. So it's not printer. I call it unprinter, which is the original name, but then they change it. But generally, and it's quite interesting because at the moment when you have a piece of paper in your hand, you just think it's a piece of paper. Maybe it's a slightly different color or slightly different taste or thickness or so, but you never realize that it can be a paper which is generally reproduced from an old one into new one. And it was quite interesting, the reaction, because the cost of the machine is about, I think, 2 million euro or so, but it can do 6,000 pages a day, which is a huge number. It looks like rather small, but it's a huge number. And I did not have a single customer who will be able to have this quantity every single day. They will have it every week or so, but not every single day. And it's interesting because the machine exists for several years already, but there has been sold few pieces and none of them in Europe. It's a
I remember working for one of the first companies that did digital storage. This was quite a long time ago. But the European Union has regulations that power generating companies, they must store data for 20 years. So the output from one power station all has to be recorded, which meant tons and tons and tons of paper being kept in huge warehouses, which must be then kept within certain temperatures so that the paper is preserved. And all of that was replaced overnight by digital technology. So
was
it was quite fantastic.
Was it really replaced? Because I do remember, same as you, in the 90s, when the first computer came, it was said, finally, the paperless time arrived to businesses. Today, there is even more paper than it was in the 90s, in some factories for sure. So are you sure that they switched, really?
Well, I don't have a great deal of faith in the wisdom of the European Union sometimes. So I could imagine that they allow both.
Because in Czech Republic, because of the legislation, I think it's something with money connected with VATs and so on. I think we should keep the paper documents for 10 years, something like that, despite of having digital one. So for my business, I write all the time the clients only email copies, only PDF. I will not print. I will not accept your printed one if sent by post, only in the electronic form. And I was so happy that I do not waste paper, and then I spoke one day to my accountant and she said, yeah, that's nice. I have to print it. because the officials would like to see it in print. They are not interested in a folder or USB stick or whatever. No, must be printed.
No. I remember one summer I was working in the UK in a government document center. And in those days, everything was done by paper. So it was a student job that summer to take all these documents, number them and file them. And try as hard as you might, you will make mistakes. And it turned out about between 8 and 10% of the documents were filed wrongly. And once they were wrongly filed, they disappeared. You simply could never find them again.
You know what is interesting? Is space used in English in connection with time?
Not really. The space and time are closely linked, but you don't use space to describe time. You use time measurement as hours, minutes, days. Then after a while, it changes into distance, so a light year. So the amount of time light will travel over a distance. So time just changed from small segments which we can understand to larger segments which are measured in distance rather than space.
Why I'm asking? Because
Maybe it's the same thing.
I was just thinking about translating the term into Czech. And we have found that in English it has many meanings, different things, but in Czech we have different words. We don't use, so for example, on the keyboard is mezera. It's just space in our text. In the space, in the universe, we call it vesmír, completely different word. And how is it in Danish?
Yeah, they would measure, they have light years for longer distance as well, so it lose all. So I think theirs is more or less the same as English, or English is the same as Old Viking. That would be more accurate. But I think it's also interesting, depending upon how you're traveling. So if you're on a train, the train will take 3 hours. Or if you're on a ship, it will take 3 days or whatever. But after a while, then you do have to start measuring in different ways. So it's quite interesting. You don't say, you know, the train will travel 150 kilometers. You do say it will take 2 hours. So time is the way to measure distance. Or to measure space.
What we did not touch is the personal space, which for many seems to be, or it's discussed quite frequently, you have to have your personal space. You have to feel free, to feel whatever. And since the beginning, we did not touch this space. Are there any other spaces which we did not touch?
Trees, for example, have personal space. So you see in the forest, trees, they don't grow into each other. They stop and they have a gap. So they have this like agreement that we will leave so much distance between me and you, which I think is remarkably civilized for a tree.
So is it the lack of personal space a matter of civilization?
I think the more civilized we are, the less personal space we have. The more you live in a city, the more personal space you have to surrender to live in the city.
You lived in UK, you live in other places, you live a lot of time in Denmark, in Germany. Does it feel different, the space there? Do you need more personal space in, let's say, in UK because there is crowded, but less space in Denmark because there is not so much people?
Certainly in the UK, you accept crowding more than Scandinavians do. So when you get onto an underground train in the UK, you have to really get crammed in. Whereas in Copenhagen, not even at Christmas, the people, they would just wait for the next train rather than avoid being crowded into a train. And I think, for example, the difference between Denmark and Finland, where Finns have so much more space because they live more remotely. They have a much wider idea of what personal space is.
Where do you feel better? In reference to space? In crowded spaces or in the spaces which are not so full?
I think in less crowded spaces. So, for example, in Copenhagen, it's not that crowded. So I don't know what if there's a European standard these days, but certainly in an office in Denmark, it's less crowded than it would be in London. I know London's not in the European Union any longer, but there is just this acceptance that in England, everything is going to be more crowded.
I just read one article by one of the Czech traveler, and she wrote about Macau. And she was just there with a group. And she said, okay, in Czech Republic, the average number of people per square kilometer is, let's say, 139 or 300. It doesn't matter. In Macau, 21,300.
Yeah, have you been to Japan, haven't you? I've never been to Japan, but I imagine there as well, you have to sacrifice personal space to get on with that city.
On the other hand, what I loved in Japan was really the efficiency. And there is the crowded, but it's connected with respect to the others. So it's crowded, but as a foreigner, you don't feel it so crowded. It's a lot of people, but still, you don't feel like being in Prague or in a small village with a lot of people around you. There is much more people, and still, I didn't feel that. In the Hong Kong was slightly worse, but in Japan it was strange.
Yeah, if you have a city the size of Tokyo, you've got to have extremely good organization.
That's right. And underground there, unbelievable. The only issue for the foreigners, all written in Japanese, no English. little issue. No, some has been in English, but not many.
No, it's funny. The first time I've experienced that, and I hadn't thought about it before. The first time I went to a group, not thinking they had a different alphabet, and the shock of not being able to read something was really fundamental. You know, I'm not going to be able to get around here because I can't read.
What was interesting, I knew that in Japan the teachers, so the students learn English generally from kindergarten. So everybody should understand English there. But almost majority of the people shame to speak English. So they understand, but then they start to reply in Japanese. And I have the same in France, where the French do not want to speak English. They do understand, but they reply automatically in French. And yeah, it was a little disappointed. But still, you can, if there is a will, there is a way. It's all the time. Have you ever tried to write without space, without using the space bar?
No. It would be chaos, I think.
I will come back to your publisher. It's very hard to read. You can do it, but it's really hard. So you have to read very carefully to understand what is written. Yeah. But it's quite interesting because I have a broken space bar one day and I try to write without. Even for me as an author was very difficult to read.
The most interesting typeface to try and use is Courier, the typewriter typeface. Mm-hmm. Because that works off of a grid. It's not like most letters have kerning to them, so that depending upon the letter before and the letter after, the spacing just between the letters, let alone the words, changes. But on the typewriter, it doesn't. Every letter is given the same amount of space.
That's right.
And so it's a remarkably mathematic typeface to use. And when you read it, you do tend to have difficulty reading it because it doesn't space properly.
Because you are a writer, do you have the ability of speed reading?
No, I read my task, but I really enjoy it, so I don't want to rush it.
I don't know where I get it, but I can go over the page and next one, and I do understand the context. I don't need to read the sentences, but I do understand the context. And when there is something interesting, I slow down and read it really in detail. And I was able to read several books a day, for example. So it was quite interesting. Probably get it from my granddad because he read one book per day for 11 years. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Did you ever see the film Rain Man?
Yes.
With, I think it was with Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
The real character, it was based upon a real character. And I saw a documentary of him. He lived in Dallas, Fort Worth, around that area of Texas. And these documentary makers, they met him in the Central Library. And he was reading two books, one for his left eye, one for his right eye. And he just scan the page, turn them over. So and he absorbed everything. It was quite incredible. His brain just couldn't get enough information.
You probably have seen on YouTube or somewhere people who paint a painting or draw a drawing, different drawing with the right hand and different drawing with the left hand. I have seen it many times. But what I have seen a week ago or so was a girl making 4 different paintings, 2 with hands and 2 with her legs, holding the pencils. Never saw anything similar. How the brain of these people must work, I don't understand.
Yeah, because talking space, we've got limited space in here, but it seems for some people it's infinite. Their brains must be just wired differently.
It was really fascinating to watch. And I don't think it was a fake. I have seen similar before, but it was quite interesting. And do you think that the animals, because you mentioned about the plants which keep the space, do you think is the same for the animals? Do they keep the space? Because if you look at the many kitties or dogs or so, they are able to be in very crowded and they somehow hug together or so they can be together in very narrow space without any issues. But do you think that they feel that they recognize, or I don't know how to say it, space the same as we do?
I think that especially hunting pack animals like wolves, they reach a point where they accept that the family has become too big to be sustained where they are. And so they will split and then they'll form a new pack in new territory. And so they have a very good understanding of space and the amount of food and the number of people or a number of members that they can feed within the pack in that space.
But is it the understanding of space, or is it more connected to the understanding of survival? Because if there will be too much in a too small space, they will probably not survive because it will be not enough food or whatever. Isn't it more an instinct?
But they're territorial as well, a lot of these animals. So they do understand how much space is theirs, how much they need, and what belongs to somebody else. It's so interesting that you're on the same piece of land that will be owned, the territory of the birds, the territory of the wolves, the territory of the whatever. So all the animals have made their own boundaries within the same land, or different boundaries, but within the same land.
I know that I have read more about space as a universe, but I do not remember, really do not, when there was some deeper discussion about the space as we are talking right now. So the different aspects of the space or so, or the animals as you describe it, isn't it somehow missing in the discussion? What is the reason that we do not speak about it? Is it so common, or is it the not enough understanding of the term space?
Because I think for humans, when you buy your house, then you've got your house and your garden, that's your space. But you don't think about the other animals which use that space. You consider this is mine, but it's not. It's partly yours, but it's partly the other animals, foxes, hedgehogs, whatever, that will use your garden and use your space. And the birds, of course, will fly over it.
I came to this term at a moment when I thought, okay, we are part of nature. And the first what we do when we buy a garden or a plot of land, we put a fence around. How we would like to be a part of a space starting with a fence.
Yeah. And in a way, all animals do that, but they mark their territory in different ways. So a lot of animals, we use scent to mark the boundary. So cats will respect their scent, but for dogs, it has no meaning because they have a different scent.
I just wonder if there is any connection, space and footprint.
Yeah. I mean, because we have different footprints depending on the activity we're talking about.
which is the space somehow.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one interesting thing which I've never seen is I've seen physically how much food one human being will consume in a year, but I've never seen how much space is needed to produce that food.
That's interesting because I am sure we have, not two of us, but as a human species, we have right now the computers which should be able to visualize that. I'm sure. I have seen very interesting visualization, and we talked about it before. It was how much space all the people need on the globe need if every single one is 1 square meter. So we have 8 billion whatever square meters. And I was surprised because it was slightly bigger than New York plus few suburbs. It was all what was needed if one human is 1 square meter, which means very little from the planet will be dedicated to humans. All the rest will be empty. And still, there is a discussion how the planet is not big enough for 8 billion people. You know, in some way, I think that the space is being hijacked, not in a way of the term, but in a way, I will have in short, I should have a discussion with some people who do the visualizations, who work with the space industry and so on. And I will ask them about the visualization because it can be very, very interesting.
I think another thing would be to see how much fresh water is being used for human food production compared to how much water we use for energy and other kinds of industrial production, especially online mega companies like Netflix and Amazon. They require so much water to operate. It's really shocking.
We have spoken about the SpaceX. Every single launch, it's cooled down by water or somehow. The volumes, we cannot imagine at all. 400 launches means more water than Africa consumed probably in 10 years maybe. And still we are doing, of course, it's said that no water disappear from the earth. This is what the scientist says, that the water we are drinking is millions and billions, whatever years old, because it was just a different substance in a different place, but it's a circle. And they say it's really not disappearing, just it's changing the way how it's being stored. So it can be underwater, it can be in the clouds, it can be frozen. And just yesterday, day before yesterday, I have seen David Borlas, who make great videos about science and so on every week. And he touched the Arctic or the Arctic, so this ice covered piece of earth. And there was one interesting information. He spoke about it as it is the biggest reservoir of drinking water. But did you drink this water?
I don't think any was any good if it was melted.
If it's melted, then it mixes with the salt water. So I do not understand why it's called the biggest reservoir of drinking water when nobody is, okay, few, of course, are drinking it, but all the rest is not. So why they use this term to describe it? I know the other situation is critically shrinking and so on. I do understand all of that. What I do not understand, the description. Why they speak about it as a space filled with drinking water, which we do not drink.
Yeah, I think that I read some of it. If the water on the south, the Antarctic region, if that ice melted to water, the sea would rise about 60 meters, which is catastrophic because almost every major city is on the coast. So we would lose all our arable lands, all of our cities, everything would be lost underwater. and the land remaining isn't fertile enough to sustain it as a human population. So that ice has to remain as ice. That can never be different.
I would be happy, but unfortunately, the results or the measurements show up that it's decreasing really, really rapidly. And they are trying to cover it with some textile, for example, to reflect the light and so on. Nothing was successful until now. So again, I don't think we can change the climate. What I think we can change is our behavior. This is what we can change. And if you are in the factories and you see how they are resistant, no matter what they do, they are resistant to their own change. There was yesterday in the conference, there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers guy responsible for ESG for 7 years already. And I asked him a simple question. What PricewaterhouseCoopers did in their own organization to change the business model, what they do to be more sustainable. He answered what they did for the others. But he was not sure, probably, or nobody asked him this question before, but it's a basic question. If I would like to, sorry, to respect your space, I have to ask you where the space is. How big is the space? Because without it, I cannot respect it in a way which can be different from your feeling and so on than from my own. But all these giants act the same.
Yeah, they do. It's actually one other thing is that space is stable for human beings. So the bigger, even a confined space like a car, the bigger the car, the more space you have, the more of a status symbol it is. You've got to have a bigger yacht, you've got to have a bigger aeroplane, you've got to have a bigger house, you've got to have more land. Space is it's a measurement of wealth and success.
Space is this is very interesting. We have 2.5 minutes left. So it's quite interesting final thought that space is the measurement of wealth. Never heard it before.
It's a status symbol. Space.
Oh. I think that Bill will be sad that he did not join, but next time, we will have the same time as usually. Okay, Kevin, I would like to thank you. It was once again very interesting discussion, which lead us in really in all directions, and the final statement was very interesting.
Interesting. We didn't leave the planet.
That's
a surprise.
It is so. And despite there are plans and whatever I think on the moon would like the Chinese have a station in 5 years. The Indians would like to have a space station open in 2028 already. They announced it yesterday. The European Space Agency is trying to do a lot of things, but all of them will start with a lot of trash and waste and reducing of the space, not increasing the space, in fact. So thank you for your time. Have a nice time free of waste and wasting in all its forms. Stay safe, be free, be human, and how to say, be spaceful? No, I think a different one.
Respect each other's space.
Respect each other's space. Thank you for that and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael. See you. Bye-bye.